Disaster on top of disaster. A helicopter crashes while attempting to rescue climbers trapped in the mountains of Oregon. After 37 weeks, the search is over. The bell tolls at ground zero for those lost and for those never found. Rumsfeld is going to India and Pakistan as their conflict risks a nuclear war and threatens the U.S. war on terror. And the latest in school trips. Wait till you see where they're taking kids now.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
And good evening. Dan is on assignment tonight. I'm John Roberts. We begin tonight with a mountain rescue mission that ended in disaster. The high drama all caught on videotape. A helicopter was helping to rescue 9 climbers who had fallen into a crevasse near the summit of Oregon's Mount Hood. Struggling for altitude at nearly 11,000 feet, the chopper struck the snow and tumbled down the mountainside. The Mount Hood disaster came just a day after an accident involving 4 climbers on Mount Rainier in Washington. More on all of this now from correspondent Jerry Bowen.
The Air Force Reserve Black Hawk helicopter was just pulling away from a crevasse where 3 climbers had died and others were awaiting rescue when it crashed and rolled down the mountainside, critically injuring 1 of the 5 crewmen aboard.
It is tricky up there, and these guys do a great job getting these patients off the mountain, and we're just hoping that they're okay, and we're going to try and get to them and give them some medical attention.
The weather was sunny and the winds calm near the summit of the 11,000-foot tall Mount Hood. Still, officials say high-altitude operations are always risky.
It did go from bad to worse, and, we're here trying to help people, and unfortunately the rescuers become the rescuees, and, we're just hoping that they're going to be okay.
The helicopter was part of a rescue effort called to remove 9 climbers who'd fallen into a 30-foot deep crevasse some 800 feet from the top of the mountain. 3 of the climbers died, and the helicopter had removed 2 other critically injured climbers to a nearby hospital. The crew was attempting another rescue when they crashed. Today's helicopter crash and climbing deaths is the worst disaster at Mount Hood since 1986, when 11 people died. 9 teenagers and 2 teachers perished then in a freezing snowstorm during an annual school climb. And after today's crash, other rescue helicopters flew to the mountain to continue the rescue efforts of the climbers and the downed crew. It's been a deadly 2 days on the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. Yesterday, 2 climbers perished atop Mount Rainier in Washington State, and a 3rd climber is feared dead there. John? Jerry Bowen reporting for us tonight from our Los Angeles bureau. Jerry, thanks. It began with the sounds of horror September 11th. It ended today with the sounds of silence. Here in New York City, the search for victims and the removal of debris at the site of the World Trade Center disaster are officially over, leaving an open wound on the Manhattan landscape. And across America, hearts that will never fully heal. Byron Pitts reports from Ground Zero.
Hot! This morning on this 16-acre site where so many died and so many suffered, men and women in uniform stood soldier straight, and a nation stood still. It was a service of symbols and silence. Not a word was spoken, not once. At 10:29 Eastern, that moment the second tower fell on September 11th, the New York City Fire Department bell sounded 20 times. It's the traditional signal for a fallen firefighter. 343 fell here, including Gregory Cicito. His remains have not been found, but for nearly 9 months his brother Steve searched and prayed.
I'm glad I helped bring closure to a lot of families.
How about for your family?
Not yet.
From day one, firefighters and police officers, iron workers and construction workers dug in a pile 20 stories high.
Got rescue 5 up there?
And 7 stories deep. 1.6 million tons of concrete and steel removed by muscle and machine. Larry Keating was there the first day and the last.
We did a lot of laughing down here together. We did a lot of crying together.
They did it all in record time, 3 months ahead of schedule. More than 1 million man-hours to reduce a pile into a pit. It was gruesome work. Bodies and body parts. 1,100 confirmed deaths. In 261 days, strangers became family and changed a crime scene into a church. Today, the last column and the last stretcher were taken out, and a new sort of sadness sunk in.
While they may say, well, I'd be glad to get home, I'll be glad not to come down here, there's a very mixed, it's a mixed bag for all of them until they find everybody.
In time, a memorial will be built here to mark the place where heroes died. And honor still lives. Today's service took 20 minutes to say goodbye, and not a soul had to say a word. John?
Byron Pitts in Lower Manhattan, thanks. In the weeks ahead, workers will continue to sift through Trade Center debris hauled out to Staten Island, still hoping to find and identify more remains. So while the recovery at Ground Zero is over, Jim Axelrod reports the trauma for the families goes on.
Forgive Rosemary Travers for passing up today's service at Ground Zero.
It's like another day, only they're having a ceremony. It doesn't go away.
A World Trade Center widow with 3 kids under 14. She's focused on a pan of quesadillas and her first grader's field trip.
They would have been proud to be there and appreciative, but I think they have to just go on and be children.
Truth be told, there's another reason she stayed away. No remains of Wally Travers have been identified, and she doesn't want to think of Ground Zero as his grave.
If we get him back, it would be nice to just sit and reflect on what happened in his own place, not with, downtown.
At last count, more than 1,700 victims remain unidentified. That means more than 1,700 families are in the same situation as Rosemary Travers' family, praying someone will tell them soon the last thing they ever thought they'd want to hear.
This is certainly the largest scale DNA identification project ever undertaken.
Kevin McElfresh runs a lab in Virginia where more than 12,000 body parts have been cataloged. So far, they've made 1,200 matches to DNA of World Trade Center victims. Progress, but still, more than half the families who lost someone are like the Travers family and have no remains to bury.
It will be a victory on our part if we can find the sample of her loved one and give it back to her.
If she's there, I believe they will ID her.
NYPD officer Steve Campbell lost his wife Jill, the mother of his son Jake. Unlike Rosemary Travers, he was among the many at Ground Zero today.
I go there to, be with my wife. It's the only place I got right now.
Campbell finds strength in ritual, but knows its limits as well.
Until my wife comes back, or I get my wife back, I can't move on from September 11th. She belongs with us. She doesn't belong down there.
In that way, Officer Campbell and Rosemary Travers are exactly alike. What they both want most is to hear from a lab they can bring their loved one home from Ground Zero to rest in peace and in private. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
Turning to the worsening conflict between India and Pakistan, President Bush is sending Defense Secretary Rumsfeld to the region next week to try to head off a war over the disputed region of Kashmir. Just in case, the United States is making plans to evacuate more than 60,000 Americans from the two countries. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin has the latest.
U.S. intelligence estimates India would be able to launch limited strikes within a few days, but is 2 to 3 weeks away from being ready to conduct a major cross-border operation into the part of Kashmir controlled by Pakistan. Neither side is likely to attack before a pair of high-level emissaries, first Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage and then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, hold talks in both India and Pakistan next week. President Bush says Pakistan's Musharraf must blink first and crack down on terrorists who launch raids across the line of control, which divides Kashmir between India and Pakistan.
He must stop the incursions across the line of control. He must do so. He said he would do so.
U.S. intelligence believes both India and Pakistan intend to limit any fighting to Kashmir. But once it starts, there is a high probability it could escalate into something the world has never seen. All-out war between two countries armed with nuclear weapons. U.S. analysts believe Pakistan would resort to nuclear weapons if its capital of Islamabad, only 150 miles from the border, were threatened by India's superior conventional forces. According to Rumsfeld, a nuclear war would not spread radioactive fallout over the U.S., but it would be an unimaginable horror for people living in India and Pakistan.
It would be bad. It would not be pretty.
The Pentagon has teams in both countries updating evacuation plans for an estimated 100,000 American citizens.
It's a big job.
Do you have it?
And for the most part, people would have to get out on their own through commercial activities.
The State Department has already ordered all non-essential personnel out of Pakistan, and officials say they cannot afford to wait much longer before issuing a similar order for India. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
Even a conventional war between India and Pakistan could also severely hamper the U.S.-led war on terrorism. And as correspondent Bill Whitaker reports, there are growing signs that Osama bin Laden's followers are plotting new violence in Kashmir.
Saying it had no choice, Pakistan today pulled some troops from the hunt for al-Qaeda on the Afghan border and shifted them to the Indian border, where the dispute over Kashmir is boiling. India loaded short-range missiles with conventional warheads today, and the war of words heated up. India says al-Qaeda terrorists slipped into Kashmir under Pakistan's nose. Pakistanis called that a cynical lie.
If there is some question whether al-Qaeda actually is behind the Kashmiri terror, officials here say there is no doubt that some members did in fact cross the Afghan border and now are operating here in Pakistan's major cities. They say 3 horrific recent acts of terror targeting Westerners bear the stamp of al-Qaeda. The kidnapping and murder of Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl. The grenade attack on an Islamabad church that killed 5, 2 of them Americans. This bus bombing in Karachi, 11 of 14 people killed were French technicians. Pakistan is being haunted by its past, say some observers. For years, its leaders encouraged Islamic militants on its borders. While Pakistan insists it no longer does, former protégés, it seems, are bringing the terror home.
It's been simmering and festering for a long time. The problem of extremist groups operating within Pakistan, the problem of widespread availability of weapons.
While Pakistan and India would surely suffer from war, al-Qaeda could benefit.
For them, it would be a great opportunity to, widen their activities and to spread their tentacles and to slip away from the hands of the Afghan administration, the U.S. forces, and the Pakistani forces.
There's a fear here that al-Qaeda still could destabilize the whole region. Now the U.S. knows to win the war on terror, it must prevent the war over Kashmir. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Islamabad.
The FBI said today an empty launch tube for a shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missile found in Saudi Arabia appears to be linked to al-Qaeda. But the Bureau said that if terrorists intend to use such weapons, their likely targets are U.S. military forces in the Persian Gulf region and not commercial jets in the United States. Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, new anti-terror rules. The FBI could spy on American mosques. Civil libertarians are protesting. And Eye on America, school trips to the mall. What are students learning there?